Hello and welcome. It is with great honor that I, Katie Taher, am here as your host for this new series titled My Time with Radha. In this debut episode, I speak with Swami Jyotihananda about her relationship with her guru, her spiritual teacher, Swami Sivananda Radha. We talk about creativity as Swami Jyotihananda shares stories of how she first got involved with Yasodhara Ashram and discusses how the teachings can help others reach their highest potential. Namaste. I am here with Swami Jyotihananda, and we're here to have a conversation about her experience in relation to Swami Radha's teachings and her time living at the ashram. My name is Katie, and before we begin, I think we would both like to do a land acknowledgement. So I am situated in Montreal on land which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst Indigenous peoples, including the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations. And Swami Jyotihananda, welcome.
Thank you, Katie. It's really good to be talking with you again. And I am here at the ashram, Yasodhara Ashram, on the shores of Kootenay Lake. And I would like to acknowledge that this is the traditional lands of the Ktunaxa and the Sinixt peoples who lived here for 10,000 years. And we are very grateful to be on this land and to be looking after it.
Thank you. And it's my hope that people listening to this podcast also take a moment to acknowledge the land that they are situated on and further to consider the ways in which we can support Indigenous nations across Turtle Island. And so I had asked Swami Jyotihananda if she would like to begin this podcast saying a prayer, and you decided on the Divine Mother prayer. Do you want to say a little bit about the prayer before we begin?
This is a prayer that Swami Radha brought to us, and it comes from a teaching called the Ananda Lahari, or the Wave of Bliss. It's a very, very ancient prayer, and it came to her from her guru, Swami Sivananda of Rishikesh in India. And it's a way of honoring the feminine and the acknowledgement. Swami Radha used to say over and over again, Divine Mother is in everything, everything. There is no separation. And so it's very interesting to look at the world that way and think that whatever I'm seeing or hearing is coming from grace and the love of the divine. So we'll say that. Will you say the prayer with me, Katie? Yeah. O Divine Mother, may all my speech and idle talk be mantra. All actions of my hands be mudra. May all eating and drinking be the offering of oblations unto thee. All lying down, prostrations before thee. May all pleasures be as dedicating my entire self unto thee. May everything I do be taken as I worship.
It is such a great pleasure to be doing this with you. So we're starting this podcast together, and you are the first person being interviewed for this recording and for this series. And so I'm very grateful and honored to be having this conversation with you. So thank you for joining me today, Swami Jyotihananda.
Thanks, Katie. I'm honored as well to be able to talk about Swami Radha and her work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. To begin, I thought that I would like the listeners and others who may not know the story to hear of the first time you ever came to the ashram, because it's a story that I know pretty well and I always have found it very intriguing. So what was that like, the first time you ever came on the grounds of the ashram?
Yeah, okay. I have to say, I have to give you a prequel to that. I lived in Nelson, and I was going to art school, and there was a big event that included all kinds of people in the arts. And in that event, there was a table that the ashram had, and there was a couple of people there, and they had flyers about the ashram. And so I took a flyer, and I was very interested. This was back in maybe 73. And I was very interested in finding out what the purpose of my life is, as I had been ill with cancer, and I was trying to understand why. And so one dark November day, my husband and I took the ferry across, and the road to the ashram in those days was very steep and it was country, definitely, hard to get to. And we drove down this steep road and parked in the parking lot. And this was in the early 70s, at a time when there were all kinds of people around who were different cultures, trying to get you to join their spiritual group, people on the street in Nelson. And so anyhow, I ended up in the parking lot at the ashram, and it was, as I said, it was a dark day and no one was around. And there's a A-frame building right there on the parking lot where the office and bookstore used to be. And so we got out of our car and walked over to the bookstore, which was open, but nobody was there. And we got a little nervous and thought, oh, what is this place anyhow? And we just sort of looked at each other and went back to our car and jumped in the car and drove away. So that was the first toe in the water. And we do a dance here that shows the divine making this kind of movement. And I felt that that's what happened to me. I was slowly drawn in. And so the next time that I actually stepped foot on the ground of the ashram was in 1977, and my husband and I came to take the 10 days of yoga. And in those days, Swami Radha was doing a lot of traveling. She had made a promise to herself that she would put the ashram on the map so that people would start coming. And so she traveled all around Canada and North America and taught courses in people's homes. And she taught workshops in churches. She gave talks and really made herself available. And so she was off doing that. She wasn't even here at that point. But, she had trained her teachers, and it was a remarkable experience for me to take that course, which has gone on, 50 years, and it's now called the Yoga Journey. And what's happening to people now is what happened to me. It opened up a really deep awareness of possibilities for me that I hadn't allowed myself to know. And I just kept coming back after that. And finally, in 1978, I came to do a workshop called Women and Spiritual Life. And Swami Radha had just published her work, Kundalini Yoga for the West. when she left India, Sivananda said to her, "You're going back to the West. I want you to update the teachings so that the Western mind can understand them. You're not a Hindu. That's not your job to teach Hinduism. Your job is to pass on the teachings in a way that's relevant for people in the West." And can you imagine? What
a task.
Yeah, like so amazing that she took that on. And she came back to Canada in 1955. And so this was 1978. And for 20 years, she studied the ancient texts. She did the practices. So she did the practices that allowed her to understand what the ancient texts were saying. And she incorporated that into Kundalini for the West, her main teaching. So all the books had just been published. So this was the first time I met her. And she was sitting out in her garden in front of her home, which is called Many Mansions. And she was signing books for people very graciously. And so I bought a Kundalini book for myself and one for my husband. And on mine, she wrote, "Just like Jacob's ladder, climb to the very top." And so that's all. I've always treasured that. But I didn't really understand it until I started deeply exploring her teachings and seeing what was possible. And I have to say that first time I came to the ashram in 1977, I'd been going to all kinds of places trying to find answers. And almost from the moment I landed as a student, I felt like there were no constraints. Nobody was going to say to me, "Well, you can go this far, but you definitely can't go that far." Nobody was going to say that. It was up to me, and that these teachings were big enough and broad enough and wide enough that I could expand as far as I was able and still not reach the end. That was a remarkable, safe feeling.
Wow, that is incredible. And so when you came back for your second course, and sorry, was that called Woman and Spirituality?
Women in Spiritual Life.
Woman in Spiritual Life. And so was Swami Radha teaching during that workshop, or was she mostly just there kind of taking care of things and managing?
Well, she was at the ashram at that time.
Yes.
And this was also in 78. And this was the third year that she had offered this workshop. And the first 2 years, she had invited women teachers from all over the place to come and present and take part. And this year, something happened and none of the people she invited could come. And so she called on her teachers that she had trained, and a lot of them were women who were teaching around Canada. There were 4 women who she had trained, and she asked them to come and lead the course. And at one point, I think towards the end of it, we were told, "Well, Swami Radha is going to come and meet with you this afternoon. So write out a question on a piece of paper, and she will choose some and answer it." So we all handed it in. And so she always was very, very elegant, very elegant. To go back a bit, at a certain point, after she became a Swami, and when she was still in Vancouver, she came to the ashram in 63, so it must have been around 1960 or so. She had worn a sari, a traditional garb, and she had a huge number of people who were coming to her classes and talks. And she said to herself, "Well, I wonder why they're here." Are they here just because of how I look, you know? So she said, I'm going to take my robe off and see what happens. And she did. And the number of people just dwindled away because they wanted to be with a quote unquote holy woman. They didn't want the teachings. So anyhow, she always presented so beautifully. She was very elegant and attractive. And anyhow, so she's sitting in this chair, and one of the women gave her this little pile of questions, and Swami Radha's looking through them, and she read out a few and answered them. And then suddenly she stopped. She looked around, shook her head. She said, look at this. She picked one of them out, and it was a piece of paper torn from a notebook, very raggedy and messy. And she said, look at this. She said, unless you can learn to put quality into your every act, you're never going to get anywhere. And she dropped all the papers on the floor, stood up, and left the room.
Oh, my goodness.
And I just thought, wow.
Wow. Yeah. Don't crumple up your paper and put quality into your life. Yeah, certainly. And I wanted to also talk a little bit about, because you were coming to the ashram and you were involved in the teachings for a while before you actually met Swami Radha. Is that correct?
Before I started to get her to know her, yeah. So in 79, my husband and I came and did the YDC, or the 3-month course. It was called the YTC then. And she was still traveling and teaching at universities. And she came back to work and gave a talk on the Kundalini system, which was one of those experiences where I didn't understand it on one level, and it came in on another level, and it was awesome. And so I met her at that time, and we were going back to Lethbridge, where I lived and where Marianne and Julie, Swami Radhananda and Lalitananda lived. And she invited us for lunch, and we had lunch with her. And I said to her during that lunch, which was she was very gracious, and I said to her, would you ever come and teach a workshop in Lethbridge? And she said, yes, I can do that. You have to arrange it. And I'll need to have a certain number of people, so I'm not just teaching 1 or 2 people. So we went home, and we contacted everybody we knew. We got about, I don't know, a huge number of people, 18 or 19 people. And we had a garage at our place that we weren't using for our car, so we refitted the garage with somebody's carpet and a lot of chairs, and that's where we had the workshop. But just before that, in the summer, we had taken a course. We'd gone to take a course from her, and she said to me, okay, there's a person in, I think somewhere in Ontario, who had set up a workshop, and called her at the last minute and said, she didn't have enough people. And so Swami Radha was quite annoyed at this, and she said, well, you better know that you have enough people or I'm not going to come. So we went home and made sure that all the people who said they were going to come made a deposit and said they were coming. And she came and taught a life seal. And it was remarkable. And yeah, and at the end of the life seal, she said, Susan, that's my first name, Susan is going to teach a Kundalini class, and who's going to sign up for it? So we gathered a group of people and started working with the Kundalini book. And it was a sort of a leaderless class, really, because we all wrote papers, and which is how we did it in those days, and went through and answered the questions that she asked in the book, and really created a group of people that were dedicated and carried on. Yeah.
How incredible is that? Yeah, and I just wanted to clarify for listeners who might not know, but so Swami Radhananda was Swami Radha's successor, and her name, as you mentioned, was Mary Ann, and then Swami Lalitananda, who is now the spiritual director and president of the ashram, her name used to be, her first name, Julie. And yeah, I would love to hear a little bit about your relationship with the two of them. So they were both sisters, and I know your connection with them goes quite back.
Yeah. We, Marianne and I, were part of a women's center, a feminist center in Lethbridge, and we published a little newsletter, and people wrote articles and drew pictures, and I looked after the library. We had funding. It was and so we bought feminist books, and people came and bought the books, and we had little workshops. We had what was called then a consciousness raising group. So a group of women met once a week and had some questions that came out of what's her name's magazine. Oh, I can't remember her name. Anyhow, yeah, and that was how we began to work together. And then when I went to the ashram and took the 10 days of yoga, I came and asked the group to sponsor the fellow who had taught dreams in our 10 days. And they agreed, and we invited him to come on his way home, because he was an ashram connection, but he didn't live at the ashram. And he came to Lethbridge and gave a talk, and it was a time when I was really stepping out of myself and taking responsibility for things. And so we were all, Marianne and I and another young woman had a dream group for a year where we did dreams together. And then Julie, Swami Lalitananda, came and lived with Marianne. And so we all were together. We were all connected. And every time Swami Radha came, they were there. And Swami Radha came at least twice a year and taught a workshop. And then she decided to start Sivananda had said to her, start an ashram, which she did. And then he said, and start centers. And so she actually tried to do that for a few years, and it didn't work out. And in 1982, she had a health scare, and she thought, no, I have to follow what I've promised my teacher, Gurudev Sivananda, that I would do. And so she asked my husband and I if we would be part of a center. And the interesting thing was, the day that she called, the day before, my husband had just got a job in Calgary. And she wanted to start a center in Calgary and asked if we were interested. So it was like it was sort of ordained. And the interesting thing about the first center, which she called Shambhala House, but later on she changed it because of the Buddhist Shambhala centers that were coming up. Anyhow, she didn't have enough money to buy a house. So she started with her begging bowl, going to various people and asking them to contribute to a house. She was not afraid to do that. She was not afraid to do anything to make the teachings available to people. That was her most important goal, that people become aware of what they could do to make their lives better. So she found this house and bought it, and my husband and I moved in with another fellow who was one of her students, and I was there for 10 years.
Wow. The first ever Radha house.
Yeah. It was Shambhala House, Radha House. Did they have another name? Yasodhara Center.
Yasodhara Center, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, lots of creations kind of all around North America. Mostly Calgary, Spokane, and Ottawa, I believe.
Ottawa, Montreal, there was one for a while. Victoria, there was one in Salmon Arm. Edmonton. Vancouver.
Lots of committed people
Yes.
coming together for the teachings and to support her work, really. Yeah, and I think now would be kind of a good time to segue into our theme for today, which is creativity. And I thought it would be a good way to bring in Divine Mother even more. And so for those of you listening, based on Swami Radha's teachings, it is often said that Divine Mother has all these various aspects. So there's aspects of Divine Mother that she outlines in the Kundalini Yoga for the West, which you were just speaking about, Swami Jyotihananda. And one of the main qualities of Divine Mother, as Swami Radha discusses it, is the aspect of creation and creativity. And I have a little quote here from Kundalini Yoga for the West, where Swami Radha writes, "The feminine aspect of the divine, the great mother, the goddess, the Devi, Shakti, symbolizes creation, giving birth to all that manifests. Accepting all of creation is the worship of Divine Mother." And as this is the first podcast in this series, it's kind of the moment where something is being created, these conversations are being opened. I wanted to bring that theme in, and especially in relation to your own life, Swami Jyotihananda, of what creativity means to you and how it's sort of shown up in your life, both maybe before your introduction to the teachings, but then also throughout, and especially in the time of creating the first Radha Center or Yasodhara Center.
Well, one thing is that our order of sannyas is the Saraswati order. So there are 10 orders of sannyas in the yogic teachings, and they have many aspects. So, but ours is Saraswati. So that power represents creativity, the arts, music, dance, poetry, everything creative. And that it's so interesting to have seen over the many years how many people, and this is a little segue, but how many people come whose creativity just suddenly begins to blossom here at the ashram because there's permission for it in a world where there isn't much space for creativity unless it's anyhow, I could go on and on that, but here it's part of the whole person. And I have to go back to my own life experience because when I had cancer, I had to have a hysterectomy, and I was a very young woman, just got married. And that was part of my search to really understand, okay, who am I then? Like, what does it really mean to be a woman? Why was I born in this woman's body? And what am I meant to create? And that was one of not the reasons, because it wasn't reasoned out, but I went to art school, which was where I was when I first heard about the ashram. And that allowed me to really begin to express my own creative urges, my own visions. I learned a lot there. And it was only some years after that I realized that I had healed a lot through that experience. And so coming to the Shambhala House, the Radha Center, first of all, I wanted it to be beautiful. So I spent a lot of time making it beautiful so that when people came in, they came into a place that was inviting. And I suppose that my own experience as a teacher was really molded there. I don't know if molded is the right word, but it gave me an opportunity. I didn't think of it at that time, like, oh, this is an opportunity to use my intuition. But I began to draw on that part of myself and become creative in my teaching and what I was presenting and what I was asking people, even though we were, using Swami Radha's book, which is just an amazingly creative book. It allowed, and this is what's interesting about this work, you have this very strong base that stays solid. It's not like as a teacher we change it all around, but we can draw from ourselves a way of entering into those teachings and open a door for people to do that. And that's what I learned over those years in Calgary. I learned that I could do that, and I could learn there were lots of ways to open those doors for people and encourage them to go through. And the other part was satsang, which was always just such a wonderful experience for me. And lots of people used to come. We didn't, at that point, it's slightly different now, we didn't do many talks ourselves, but we would read from our teachings. And I think it was just that the element of devotion was there, and people entered into that and allowed that devotional element in themselves it fostered that. And I wasn't sure, like I think now it was my devotion that really supported that, but I didn't really know at the time. Swami Radha used to say, satsang is really great. Susan really encourages people to come. And people came, and it was like the high point of the week, because there are people who came to Hatha class and they didn't go to anything else, and there are people who came to Kundalini, they didn't do Hatha, and there are people who came to dreams and they didn't do anything else, but all of those people came to satsang. Here, often people, when we're offering satsang, someone will say, well, the mantra is the heart of satsang. And in a sense, that's true. But I think that the real heart of satsang is that so many diverse people can come together, and they all have a yearning. They all have a deep yearning to express their devotion and gratitude. So it's the most creative place.
That interlink between devotion and creativity seems to be so clear for you.
Well, I just came to understand that creativity is not making a thing, although it can be, but it's something innate that can be expressed in every part of life. And I wouldn't have ever understood that without Swami Radha and her teachings. I mean, her mind was so expansive and so creative, and
she's quite the extraordinary woman. And you said a little something about opening the doors for people through the center that you were, starting and creating and being a part of. And it made me think of the way that you've opened the door for me personally in my own experience of living at the ashram and kind of gaining the teachings and exploring those parts of myself. And then it got to me to thinking about all the other people who who you've opened the door for. And I know particularly since Swami Radhananda, there's been kind of a movement towards younger people coming to the ashram through the OM program, which she started. And since then, the 2-month program that you mentioned, the Karma Yoga program. And yeah, I wondered if you could talk a little bit about that, like what it's been like to have young people coming to the ashram, as now you are one of the knowledge holders there.
There was a certain point where I realized that although I hadn't had children, that I had this amazing, amazing opportunity to live with people who could have been my children or my grandchildren in a kind of way that was so not traditional, not a matriarchy in the sense of I was the mother and this is, that I really could be with not only me, but all of us who are older. It's like, it's been a beautiful diversity of old and young at the ashram. And for me, it's been like a blessing, a blessing. And recently, it's become more important for me. I haven't been teaching much for the last 3 or 4 years. And so it's become really important to connect not so much as a teacher, but as a person. I can't put it into words very well, but I feel so privileged at this point in my life to have to witness the young people who come here, seeking and trying to understand what life is about, especially during these times, which are so, everything is in question. Going inward and deeply connecting with a part of themselves that's true, and being able to begin to bring that part forward with a deep knowledge that they can go out and offer that back to the world. That is a remarkable thing.
Well, and I certainly can say that that's what the ashram has done for me, in the way of, you spoke about how Swami Radha made her students realize their potential, and I think that's what the ashram continues to do. So it's a legacy that has long lived and thriving, really.
Listen, yeah. She's present.
Nothing.
I mean, she's present in the temple, which is a new temple now. We had another one that burned down, and that was her vision. And I remember one time when I was in Europe, her saying to me, well, there'll be many temples. And I thought, oh, I'm gonna make sure there's a temple. It takes a long time to soften the ego. Anyhow, but there is another temple. And what happened when our temple burned down here, it was a really devastating time. And yet, what we did as a community was we kept stepping forward and saying, the temple is the most important part. We have to rebuild. And the teaching from that was remarkable because the foundation wasn't harmed. And I could see that that's a message to all of us, to me, that we can go through very, very bad times. But what we have done in bringing the teachings into our lives and making them a place to stand, that foundation is strong.
Well, thank you so much for having this conversation with me. I think that is such a beautiful place to end. And I hope that it gives the listener some reflections regarding their potential, their creativity, and their evolution of consciousness.
Thank you, Katie. Namaste.
I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode. You can learn more about the ashram by visiting our website at yasodhara.org. You can also follow us on Instagram and YouTube. Until next time, I'm Katie Taher, and this is My Time with Radha.